If you asked where modern China's economic system really began, most answers would start in the 20th century. Mao, Deng Xiaoping, communism. But that story skips something uncomfortable. Because before ideology hardened, before revolutions simplified the narrative, one man tried to solve China's economic collapse without slogans, and history quietly buried him. Almost no one names Sun Yat-sen, not because he was unimportant, but because his ideas were inconvenient. He didn't fit cleanly into capitalism, he didn't belong to communism, and he failed before success could rewrite the story. Yet without understanding him, modern China makes very little sense. Because before China became communist, before it became capitalist with Chinese characteristics, before it became the world's factory, it was something far more dangerous. Economically hollow, politically fragmented, financially exposed, and painfully aware that the old system was collapsing faster than anyone could control. The man who saw this most clearly wasn't a general, he wasn't a warlord, and he wasn't a Marxist. He was a doctor by training and an economist by necessity. Welcome to the hidden ledger, where money, power, and history collide, and nothing is ever as simple as it looks. Sun Yat-sen didn't want to overthrow an emperor just to raise a new flag. He was trying to answer a far more dangerous question. Why had China, for centuries one of the richest and most sophisticated civilizations on Earth, become economically weak in a world that now ran on finance, trade, and industrial scale? To understand his thinking, you have to forget mythology, forget slogans, forget revolutionary romance. You have to look at the balance sheet. By the late 19th century, China wasn't poor in the modern sense. It wasn't starving everywhere. It wasn't technologically ignorant. What it was structurally misaligned. China remained overwhelmingly agrarian. Land was fragmented. Productivity was uneven. Most wealth existed in forms that couldn't be easily taxed, mobilized, or reinvested at scale. There was no unified national market. Local officials controlled revenue. Regional interests dominated decisions. Capital existed, but it was scattered, informal, and disconnected from national strategy. Meanwhile, the world around China had changed completely. European powers, and later the United States and Japan, operated on an entirely different economic logic. Centralized taxation, national debt markets, industrial output, modern banking systems. Trade protected by navies, capital that moved faster than armies ever could. China didn't fall behind because it stopped working, it fell behind because it couldn't coordinate. And the consequences were brutal. Foreign powers didn't just defeat China militarily, they hollowed it out economically. Customs revenue was controlled by outsiders, ports operated under foreign rules, tariffs couldn't be adjusted to protect domestic industry. Debt piled up without the institutions needed to manage it. China still had labor, still had land, still produced goods, but it no longer controlled the systems that turned those inputs into power. This is the world Sun Yat-sen grew up watching fail in slow motion. Unlike many revolutionaries, he didn't romanticize the past. He didn't believe restoring the old order would save anything. And he didn't believe importing Western political systems wholesale would magically fix China either. His starting point was economic realism. Sun believed political reform without economic reform was theater. Elections didn't matter if the state couldn't finance itself. Constitutions didn't matter without infrastructure. Ideals didn't matter if the economy collapsed under external pressure the moment those ideals were tested. So instead of asking how China should be governed, he asked something far more uncomfortable. How could China become economically sovereign again? His answer became known as the three principles of the people. They're often taught as political philosophy. In reality, they were an economic blueprint, unfinished, incomplete, and never fully implemented. The first principle, nationalism, wasn't about identity. It was about control. Control over trade, control over revenue, control over economic destiny. Sun understood that without economic independence, political independence was cosmetic. The second principle, democracy, was not urgent in his mind, and that alone separates him from many Western reformers. Sun believed democracy mattered, but only after economic foundations were stabilized. A starving, indebted, fragmented nation voting itself into chaos wouldn't be free. It would be fragile. But the third principle, the one Sun cared most about, was what he called the people's livelihood. This is where his thinking becomes dangerous and fascinating. Sun rejected the idea that free markets alone could rebuild China, but he also rejected abolishing markets entirely. What he wanted was coordination, land reform to prevent rent-seeking from choking productivity, state-led infrastructure to bind regions into a single economic organism, public control over railways, utilities, and strategic industries, not to eliminate profit, but to prevent private monopolies from hijacking national development. Capital should exist, but it should serve long-term national goals, not short-term extraction. Credit should flow into railroads, ports, power, and industry, not speculation or dependency on foreign finance. This wasn't Marxism, and it wasn't Anglo-American capitalism either. It was developmental economics before the term existed. Sun believed China needed to industrialize fast, deliberately, and under state guidance, not because markets were evil, but because uncoordinated markets would be devoured by foreign capital with centuries of institutional advantage. China didn't need ideological purity, it needed time. And time required stability. Here's the irony most people miss. Many Western economists later argued China suffered from too much state control. Sun believed the opposite. China had too little control where it mattered most. The state was weak where it needed strength and fragmented where it needed unity. There's nothing free market about a country that can't finance its own railroads. But Sun Yat-sen didn't get the chance to test his system. The empire fell, but it didn't collapse into a clean new order. It shattered. Revenue streams fractured, warlords carved the country into economic zones, infrastructure plans stalled, capital fled uncertainty, and the population paid the price in inflation, instability, and stalled development. When Sun Yat-sen died in 1925, he didn't leave behind a functioning state. He left a vacuum. And vacuums don't stay empty. The system he envisioned required three things China didn't yet have: centralized authority, fiscal control, and time. What followed, instead, was urgency. Into that urgency stepped ideologies with simpler answers: certainty instead of coordination, speed instead of structure, revolution instead of gradual rebuilding. When institutions are weak, extremity sounds like clarity. This is where history usually jumps straight to communism, as if the transition were clean. It wasn't. Many of Sun Yat-sen's ideas survived, not as doctrine, but as instinct. Infrastructure as power, suspicion of foreign financial dominance, markets shaped, not unleashed. Even the Communist Party absorbed pieces of his economic logic: railways, ports, heavy industry, land reform. These weren't imported straight from Marx, they were answers to problems Sun had already diagnosed. The difference was execution. Where Sun imagined coordination followed by participation, his successors chose control first, participation never. Where he saw planning as scaffolding, they made it permanent architecture. And yet, the spine of the system remained. China must never again lose control of its economic arteries. This is why modern China cannot be understood as a simple ideology. It is not purely communist, it is not truly capitalist. It is closer to what Sun Yat-sen envisioned, built under harsher constraints with fewer exits. A state that treats infrastructure as power, finance as strategy, markets as tools, not moral systems. From a Western perspective, this looks inefficient. From Sun Yat-sen's perspective, it looks like survival. He understood something many modern economies still resist admitting. Political freedom rests on economic structure. Without the ability to feed, move, power, and finance itself, a nation becomes dependent. And dependency always comes with conditions. History didn't prove Sun Yat-sen wrong, it proved him incomplete. China built the economic base he imagined, but the political openness he hoped would follow never arrived. The scaffolding became permanent, the emergency never officially ended. What began as protection hardened into control. Strip away the slogans and the truth becomes clearer. China's modern economic system is not a rejection of Sun Yat-sen. It is a distorted fulfillment of his ideas, built under harsher constraints with fewer exits. A state that treats infrastructure as power, finance as strategy, markets as tools, not moral systems. If this changed how you see history, subscribe, because the real story isn't written in slogans.